Today's keynote speaker can best be described as the man responsible for distracting all of our children from finishing their homework. Described as a visionary, Robbie Bach, former president of entertainment and devices at Microsoft, Robbie played an important role as a marketing leader in the successful launch and expansion of the Microsoft Office business. Beginning in 1999 as Chief Xbox Officer, he led the development of the Xbox business, including the launch of the original Xbox and the highly successful follow-up product, Xbox 360. Utilizing entrepreneurial principles, Robbie established the strategic process of creating a community within the already structured Microsoft world. It is these lessons in strategy, team management, and entrepreneurship that Robbie will speak on today. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Robbie Bach, our IPC APEX EXPO opening keynote speaker.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. Usually when I come to trade shows, the idea that people would get there for an 8:30 keynote is a little bit of a stretch, so I appreciate you coming out early, and hopefully I'll deliver some things that can help you as we go forward. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit today about the Xbox story, and I was at Microsoft for 22, almost 23 years, and so I always want to do a little bit of a non-disclosure statement before we get started. And I will tell you that during my time at Microsoft, I loved really every month I was there. I can't say I loved every day I was there, but I loved every month I was there. And I'm a big fan of the company. And that remains today. I've been gone for a little over 4 years. But I will also say that in that 22-year period, I learned the things that the company doesn't do well. And on reflection, as I've been gone for 4 years, I have new thoughts about things we could have done differently and would have done differently if we could do them over again. And so I sometimes describe this to people as my 22 years was, at times, the most special and greatest experience of my life, and at times a bit like being in the middle of a Dilbert cartoon. And I got a little bit of both. So hopefully today you'll hear that in my talk. You'll hear me talk both from a very honest and frank point of view about things we did poorly, as well as things we learned along the way. So, consistent with that, I'd go to meetings at Microsoft, and oftentimes those meetings were really amazing. Smart people, challenging ideas, and really worked through some difficult problems. And then there were other times when you'd look at it and you say, oh gosh, that was really a bad meeting. We were all over the place. We didn't know what we were doing. So the official title of my speech today is The Xbox Story, Business Strategy, and Entrepreneurship and Leadership. But in fact, what I'm going to talk about today really is what happened on the way to the goat rodeo. And oftentimes it felt that way, and certainly the Xbox story, which we'll talk about here now directly, was that for sure. So let me take you back. I'm going to take you back to 1999. We are just getting started on Xbox. And Xbox got started at an executive staff retreat where a guy who worked for me proposed that Microsoft do a video game console, which seemed like a completely random idea. But Bill Gates came to us at the meeting at the offsite. He liked the idea. He pursued it with some groups at Microsoft for about 3 months. And lo and behold, by the end of 1999, we were committed to doing Xbox. And our strategy, and this is the key point I want to talk about, our strategy at that point was really not very well developed. It was, we have to ship in 18 months. This is going to be the most powerful machine ever created, the biggest piece of hardware we've ever done. There's all kinds of things we have to do in software. Go. And we had 20 people. And that was our strategy. Now, you might say, well, that's the story of a startup. And in some ways, I suppose many startups are like that. But my contention is that if you want to do great innovation, if you want to do new ideas, if you want to develop those ideas in a rich way, you have to have great strategy. And you actually have to have thought through the strategy in a way that is disciplined, that people can understand. So let me tell you what happened with the original version of Xbox. The team worked incredibly hard. It was a very talented team of people. We went from about 20 people to about 2,000 people over an 18-month period. And we collected people from the Windows team and from the networking team and from our little mouse and keyboard team that did hardware. We hired people from outside in the gaming industry. We slammed us all together in a little facility, and we produced the first version of Xbox. And that product launched on November 15th, 2001. It was 7 days late, so we felt pretty good about that. And it worked, which we felt even better about that. Unfortunately, well, fortunately for us, we had some market success. So the original version of Xbox, if you go back and look, did about 20 to 25% market share in North America, about the same in Northern Europe, maybe half that well in Southern Europe. And in Japan, we had negative market share. There was about a 6-month period where more product was coming in than was going out. So we weren't successful in some markets, but generally, pretty good success. So you'd say, wow, not much strategy. Who needs strategy? You guys got a foothold, you're ready to go. Unfortunately, the lack of strategy showed up someplace else. The original business plan for Xbox called for us to lose over that first generation, let's call it something like $1.5 to $2 billion, which is a staggering number when you think about it. In fact, depending on who does the accounting and what things you include and don't include, that original version of Xbox lost between $5 and $7 billion. So that to me is a failure. I mean, it's hard to call it anything but a failure, certainly from a financial perspective. So when I think about Xbox, I have this two sides to me. One, this amazing feeling that we did something we didn't think was possible, and we did it successfully and had consumers like it. And on the other hand, you have this $5 to $7 billion loss that as a business person makes me feel very bad. And certainly there were those who were shareholders, people on Wall Street, other people inside the company who said, gosh, this is crazy, it must stop. And in fact, they wanted it to stop in literally meaning stop. The team on Xbox says, yes, verily, you're right, it has to stop, but what we're going to do is change the way we operate. And we're going to build a strategy, and we're going to take this business from its 20% beachhead and make it a market share leader, and we're going to make money doing it. And so this is where we get to a defining moment in that business. And we're going to talk specifically about strategy. The team went and did an offsite. And we said, we have to write down, for the next version of Xbox, we have to write down what we really want to accomplish. We have to tell people now, this is in 2002, what we want the product to look like in 2005. Because we're building new silicon for this product. So we got to start early. In fact, 2002 was probably late. And people need to know the foundations for what we're doing. So we agreed on this process, which we call 3-30-300. 3-30-300 meant that the management team, and in this case it was me, was going to write a 3-page document that told people all the basics they needed to know about what we were trying to accomplish. Think of this as sort of the Declaration of Independence for what Xbox is going to do. And then a group of people was going to write a 30-page document based on the 3-pager, which would describe in more detail what each part of the team had to do. And finally, the engineering team was going to write a 300-page spec for the product. So in fact, we did write a 3-pager, and I'll talk about that at great length. The 30-pager turned into an 80 PowerPoint slide deck, and the 300-page spec was probably closer to 3,000 pages. But in fact, the basic idea of writing in 3 pages, everything you think is important for strategy for the product, was an incredibly changing experience for the team and changed the direction of the business. In doing that, we used something which I now call the 3P framework: purpose, principles, and priorities. And the 3P framework focuses on these things because they are the essential building blocks you need to develop and communicate great strategy. So what's in the 3P framework? So the first stage is purpose. And a purpose statement is one sentence that defines what you are trying to accomplish with the project you're working on. Now, you will think, well, writing one sentence, that's got to be pretty easy. It turns out encapsulating what you're trying to do in one sentence is incredibly difficult. And in fact, the purpose statement we wrote for Xbox 360, the successor product to the original Xbox, was more like a long run-on sentence because we weren't very good at getting precise. But let me give you some examples of purpose statements that are precise. So Microsoft, when it started, Bill Gates and Paul Allen they probably would have called it a mission statement. They certainly didn't call it a purpose statement. But they said that the company's job is to put a computer on every desk and in every home running Microsoft software. Now, when you think about that today, it almost feels old school. Think about that in 1975. That is a purpose statement. I'm on the board of directors of a company called Sonos that makes really cool wireless speaker systems. Amazing company based in Santa Barbara. And again, they don't think of it as a purpose statement, but I can go to any of their 1,000 employees and I can say, what's Sonos about? And they will all give me some permutation of putting all the world's music in every room in your house. That's a purpose statement. And so as you're thinking about your strategy, as you're writing your 3-pager for what your business or your project or in your personal life, as you're writing that down, think about what you be your purpose statement and try to write it. And you will find that you have to rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it until you feel like you get it right. And you also have to write it in a way in which you can remember it and in which other people can remember it. So that was the first part of our Xbox 360 3-pager, purpose. The second part is principles. And to understand the importance of this, you have to go back and understand the challenges we had with the first version of Xbox. The first version of Xbox, as I said, had some people from all over Microsoft. And for any of you who know Microsoft, Microsoft does not have a Microsoft culture. That just doesn't exist. When I joined the company, there were 2 cultures. There was the applications group culture, which was the guys who were starting Word and Excel and PowerPoint and other products. And then there was the systems group culture, which is the guys who were doing operating systems like Windows and Cairo and some other things that never shipped. So there were these 2 groups, and those groups fought with each other. It's so funny. In the press, people thought those groups were colluding with each other. I've been in some of those meetings. There was no collusion possible. They couldn't talk to each other. Their development process was different. Their philosophy was different. Their time frames were different. All the principles under which they operated were different. Now, take my job as the chief Xbox officer. I hired people from both of those groups. And by the way, we hired people from the Microsoft hardware team to make our hardware. That had a whole nother culture, as you might imagine. They were the only mechanical engineers in the entire company. So they brought a new culture. And then we had the joy of hiring game content people and people from the gaming industry. Now that culture is just a whole nother world. It's sort of like Comic-Con with digital things. And it's a very strange culture. And we threw all that into one group and we said, you have 18 months, go. So it was like running the United Nations. And it ran about as well as the United Nations. And I was about as effective as the Secretary General at leading that group. And so when it came to this second version of Xbox, the product that became Xbox 360, and we're writing our principles, we said, we have to establish for the team the way we're going to work. You only get 5 principles. If you have more than 5 principles, you are not a very principled person. So you get to write down 5 things that are going to be how your group operates and works together. I'll give you an example of operating principles. Did a lot of work during the Xbox days with Walmart and Costco, 2 of our larger retailers. I'm with Walmart at the Consumer Electronics Show. We have a dinner. One of their first principles comes out because I can't pay the bill. We had to split the bill, which is a little weird. We had 15 people, and we're asking the hostess to divide the bill and figure that out. But Walmart, one of their operating principles is vendors can't pay for anything. Then we go to leave, and we have a couple of town cars, Las Vegas during CES, impossible to get around. We have a couple of town cars, pick up the Microsoft folks to take us back to the hotel. And we're driving down the road, and we see the Walmart team walking down the road. And this isn't on the main strip, this is behind the main strip. And we sort of scratched our heads, and I was talking to my contact at Walmart afterwards, and he said, well, we don't do town cars. And by the way, we share hotel rooms. Walmart's principle around lowest price every day is in everything they do as a company. If you've ever been to Bentonville and had the pleasure of going to the building they use for vendor meetings, it's a World War II bomb shelter, I swear. And I say this with pride for them because they understand what their principles are and they live by them. Costco is exactly the same way with a completely different set of principles. When we did things for Xbox, we'd have national promotions, particularly around the Christmas holiday season. But for Costco, we had to do something different because Costco has an operating principle that their members get something special when they walk in the store. And anything you buy in a Costco store, you are not supposed to be able to buy anyplace else. That's why you get 700 pounds of toilet paper in one package when you go there. And for us, for Xbox, it meant we had to bundle games. We had to bundle a controller. We had to have special packaging. We had to do different promotional work. Everything had to be different. But that was their operating principle. And so during our saga for the 3-page paper in our purpose, principles, and framework work on Xbox 360, we established those 5 principles that said this is how the team's going to work. Now, an interesting thing happened. Several senior people on the team, when we got done defining those principles and they realized what they meant, said, I can't work that way. I don't agree with the principles. And in fact, one of my direct reports, it's a 20-plus year veteran at the company, decided to leave. And the next day he left. And that was really sad and painful for me because he was great at what he did. And having said that, it was the right thing for him to do. He couldn't operate within the principles we were establishing. He disagreed with the business principles we were going to work on and wanted to do things a different way, which I respected. And he left. And that hurt the team in the short term, but it helped the team in the long term. Because the team now became a team with a capital T. And we were able to do things together. Principles are incredibly important. Don't skip that step. Make sure you write them down, that people understand them, and that people live by them. Final part of the 3-page framework, priorities. Now, the challenge in priorities is actually not figuring out what to do, it's figuring out what not to do. When I do performance evaluations with people and they come and they say, here are my objectives for the next 6 months, inevitably they have 8 items on the list. And I have to tell them, no, sorry, go back and rewrite them again, and you only get 5. And they say, why? I've got 8 things I'm going to try to do. And my response is, you're only going to get 5 done, and I want to make sure they're the right 5. So tell me the 5 most important things you're going to do. And it's no different for Xbox 360. We had to decide what the 5 most important things to get done to achieve our purpose consistent with our principles. And that meant telling the team there were 3 other things, including a project called X-Boy, which was a handheld Xbox. We're just not going to do that. We're going to focus on these things, and we're going to make sure these things happen. Now, writing that 3-pager that included purpose, principles, and priorities was not an easy task. The first draft took about 4 or 5 hours. That got revised after one of those goat rodeo meetings with my staff. We had another goat rodeo meeting to do a further revision, and then the document was finalized. I still read that document today. And as the life cycle of Xbox 360 played out, I'm shocked at how much that document changed the way we did work and how much it contributed to the success of the business. So Xbox 360, basically the same team, operating under a new strategic framework, is a business that we went from something like 23 million consoles, and I think they just passed 80 million Xbox 360 consoles. Business went from about 20% market share in some markets to a little over 40% market share worldwide. It was the #1 selling console in that generation. And it made the company billions of dollars. And my reason for pointing that out, sure, there's a little bit of pride of what myself and the team were able to accomplish. But I will tell you that having strategy enabled innovation. It's the thing that enabled us to do great things. It took away all the clutter and all the lint that gets in the way of doing amazing things and brought great clarity to the team. It pushed decisions way down into the organization so that things could happen quickly and that decisions actually got made. So as you think about the work that you're doing, and by the way, this works in your personal life, in your professional life, it works in all types of places. Think about that 3-pager and the 3P framework and think about what it can accomplish for your business. So that's the first part of what we learned during the Xbox story. That's Xbox and the 3P framework. The second part I want to talk about is something I call entrepreneurship, or otherwise known as innovation within the mothership. And in many respects, everything I'm going to talk about today is about enabling innovation. And I think a lot of people, when they think about big companies, think, gosh, it must be difficult to innovate. They look at Microsoft and they say, how did Microsoft come up with Xbox? You know, it's a big company, doesn't move super fast. How did they make that happen? The truth is that entrepreneurship is just entrepreneurship inside a larger company. And many of the things you do are exactly the same. You have to have an idea that's differentiated. You have to have the ability to communicate that differentiation. You have to have a team that can actually build the idea and build the product. You have to have a strategy around that product. You have to have people in an organization that make it work. And you have to execute like mad. And the truth is, it doesn't matter whether you're in a 15-person startup or in Microsoft's case, a 100,000-person company. All of those elements for innovation are exactly the same. And I think it's easy for people to forget the amount of innovation that has come from big companies. So I'll do my little walk through Microsoft history. PowerPoint. Love it, hate it. It's changed the way people think about all kinds of things. Microsoft bought that company when it was, 15 people in Menlo Park. It's now a huge part of their business. Outlook, from scratch. Microsoft application, a category that existed, and they changed it forever. Again, sometimes I love Outlook, sometimes I don't, but it's an amazing product. SharePoint, multi-billion-dollar business at Microsoft that nobody really pays any attention to unless you're an enterprise IT guy trying to increase collaboration in a corporation. And then you think SharePoint is the greatest thing ever. And that has become, from scratch, a great business. Azure, latest example, Microsoft Cloud Services. Still proving itself, but along with AWS and some work that Google's doing, one of 2 or 3 of the key products for the future of cloud computing. Done from scratch within Microsoft. This isn't just a Microsoft statement. People think about, take Amazon as an example. Amazon actually employs more people than Microsoft does. It's a big company. And yet Amazon created Kindle, a really cool product that has changed the way we read. You think about Apple, and Apple's lauded for its innovation, but Apple's a big place. And in fact, they came up with iPod, iPhone, iPad, and soon iWatch. So these big companies, Boeing, never want to forget my favorite hometown Seattle Boeing company. Now Boeing you got to think of as the traditional manufacturing company. Independent of its challenges to be built, the 787 is an amazing innovation. It's changing the way planes, commercial planes anyway, are built and flown. And it's going to change the industry. So big companies can innovate. And the processes you use, the 3P framework being one of them, are the same whether you're a big or a small company. And so entrepreneurship to me is something that's possible, it's something that's valuable, and it's something that everybody in this room can get behind if you want to innovate. Now, I will point out that there's a couple things that are different when you're doing entrepreneurship. If you talk to anybody who is a startup CEO or founder, the number one thing they tell you is, gosh, I wish I didn't have to spend so much time raising money. If I could only stop raising money, I could actually build a product. I've heard that saw probably 20 or 30 times. And the fact is, that's just true. Startup folks end up having to raise money all the time. They're constantly raising money. Now, for me, at Microsoft, some shareholders would say, sadly, I did not have that problem. I did not spend a lot of time raising money. Unfortunately, I spent a lot of time losing money. It was more what happened at the beginning. And so that's a difference. I could spend my time on the project, on the product, with the support of a bigger company. And so this is a place where doing entrepreneurship is actually a huge benefit to the team if you do it right, because the resources are there. Now, the second thing that's different in these entrepreneurship scenarios is that you have assets that already exist. When you're a startup company, you have no assets. You have no desks. You have no offices. You have no code. You have no brand. You are starting from scratch. That was not the case and isn't the case in entrepreneurship scenarios, and certainly wasn't the case for Xbox. We had lots of assets. In fact, we had too many assets. So to give you some examples, we had the entire Windows operating system code tree. And the Windows team wanted us to use it. And we said, verily, that's a good idea, and we probably ended up with 1/1000% of the code base in Xbox. A very important part of the kernel, I'm sure, but a small part. So in entrepreneurship cases, you got to be very careful which assets you want to use. Let's take the brand asset, Microsoft. You know, people would say, well, gosh, that must be a huge advantage for you. You don't have to build a brand. The answer, wrong. In fact, the Microsoft brand was very good for us working with people like you. When we were talking to suppliers, we were talking to manufacturers, people who were going to help us source components, the Microsoft name was awesome because they could look at our balance sheet. We didn't have to do a credit check. They could say, oh, I'm going to get paid. This company's serious. If I'm doing a big component, I'll get to meet with Bill. Microsoft was amazing. Now go to E3, the gaming show. Microsoft is a curse. They're the productivity company. This is a gaming show. We don't want products from Microsoft. We want products from something else. Electronic Arts or Activision or Sony or Nintendo, both of which had brands that were more about entertainment. And so, in fact, we had to make the difficult choice in the first version of Xbox to not use the Microsoft brand at all. So, in fact, the words Microsoft do not appear on the original Xbox. Nor did they appear in our packaging, nor did they appear in our advertising, nor did they appear anyplace else. And we made that choice consciously and had to build the Xbox brand. And then later with Xbox 360, we brought it back to Microsoft as an asset for the company and as an asset that was able to take some benefit from the Microsoft brand at that point. Once gamers liked Xbox, the fact that it was made by Microsoft actually became a little bit of a benefit because they knew we were going to spend money and stay in the business and keep at it. The third thing that you have to think about in entrepreneurship scenarios is you have to make sure as a leader that you're doing the right things. I talked about startup guys having to raise a lot of money. That's not what I did. What I had to do as the chief Xbox officer was prevent others from getting in the way. And I did a lot of work inside the company making sure that the runway was clear for the team to actually go get their work done. And all of this was well-intentioned work, but the Microsoft corporate marketing team would want to come and say, hey, we'll do your PR for you. And with all due respect to the people that did the PR for Microsoft Corporation, they were enterprise PR agencies. They didn't know how to work with Electronic Gaming Monthly. And so we had to, my job was to keep those people away and say, no, Xbox PR team, go hire your own agency. And in fact, that's what we did. Same thing with advertising. Microsoft ads do not have things that blow up. It's a common principle across the Microsoft advertising business. In Xbox advertising, everything must blow up. It's just a principle we had. So we had to choose our own advertising agency. And so my job, in many respects, was to manage across and up in the organization to convince them, A, that we knew what we were doing, which wasn't always so easy, B, to tell them when we needed help, and C, to make sure they understood when we didn't want any help, and to allow the team to do what they needed to do. So when you think about those three things in entrepreneurship, or three or four things actually, first of all, many of the principles are the same. B, you got to think about what assets you have. C, you got to think about how you're going to raise money and what that means. And D, you're going to have to figure out what you have to do across your company to manage the process. Final thing on entrepreneurship, I think there is, in the startup world, this really exciting motivator called inspiration that drives startups. Somebody has a brilliant idea that they think is going to change the world, and they think it's hard, it might not work, but they're inspired to do it. Inside a big company, sometimes that's the motivation, but oftentimes the motivation for innovation is, oh my gosh, our goose is cooked if we don't do something. And it's much more about necessity than it is about inspiration. And so if you're in an entrepreneurship scenario, make sure you understand what the motivation is. Make sure you think about not just necessity, but how you motivate people in a truly emotional way so that they can get things done. That's topic number 2, entrepreneurship. I want to proceed quickly to topic number 3 and talk about leadership. And when I think about leadership, I think of Mount Rushmore. Now, for those in the audience who aren't Americans, this analogy may not play fully through. But Mount Rushmore is a block of granite in South Dakota. In fact, it's in the middle of South Dakota. And the reason it exists is because somebody in the early 1900s wanted to create a tourist attraction in South Dakota. That's a true story. And what they did is they carved the faces of 4 great presidents in the mountain. Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Teddy Roosevelt. So the question I ask you today when you think about leadership, if we were to add a 5th head to Mount Rushmore, who in the last 50 years would you add? And when you look around, some people are scratching their heads. You can get to maybe another Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt got us through the Great Depression and World War II. You got some people that will argue for John F. Kennedy. I would suggest mostly for sentimental reasons because his presidency never really finished, sadly. You have some people who argue for Ronald Reagan, a sentimentality of a different sort. And for me, I come back to somebody who's not a president at all. I come back to Martin Luther King Jr. If you ask yourself who's changed America the most in the last 50 or 60 years, the civil rights movement might be the movement that has changed America the most, and Martin Luther King Jr. might be the leader who changed America the most. And while you can easily argue that his dream has not been brought to full fruition, the country has changed in fundamental ways. And so the question before us when we talk about leadership is, what is it that makes a great leader? Why would I propose Martin Luther King to be on Mount Rushmore? Why is Abraham Lincoln on Mount Rushmore? And what does that mean for us each day in what we do? And how does it mean we can use that leadership skill to innovate? So let me shift gears a little bit. I think of leadership as having some interesting components. There's no recipe for leadership, but there are interesting components. The first of those components I think of as knowing your superpower. So every person in this room has a superpower. You have something that you are incredibly good at. Maybe it's a technical superpower. Maybe it's a leadership management superpower. Maybe it's financial capability and mathematical superpower. Maybe it's a people superpower. But you all have it. And so as you all think about being leaders, you have to think about what's my superpower and where am I great? I think of this like the Avengers. So some of you are Iron Man. Some of you are really smart. I suppose there's a few in the audience who are like the Hulk. I can't see them right now, but big and strong and powerful. I'm sure there are some Black Widows in the audience who are sneaky and stealthy and get things done before people realize they needed to get done. Now, all of those Avengers individually are amazing, but they're better collectively and better as a collection. And so the secret for you as a leader is understanding what your superpower is and then taking advantage of that. And as I talk in a minute, it's about surrounding yourself with other people who fill in the blanks in your skill set. So my superpower, here's a confession. I am not a technical person. I took one computer programming class my junior year at the University of North Carolina. We used punch cards. And the computer broke 3/4 of the way through the semester, so we didn't have to finish the class. That's a true story. So I am not a technical person. Another confession, I am not a gamer. I don't play games. I'm bad at them. I don't love games. What I do love is the business of Xbox and the amazing things that the business and the console industry brought. And I took my superpowers in business and leadership and management and built around them. So understand your superpowers. Make sure you know what they are. Second thing on leadership, great leaders understand where they're weak. And like the Avengers, complement themselves with people who have other skills. In my case, there were 2 technical guys who saved Xbox. One's a guy named Todd Holmdahl, who is the head hardware guy for both Xbox 360, Xbox One, and now the Microsoft Band. And then a guy on software named Jay Allard, who's just an inspirational genius when it comes to software and experience. Those 2 guys complemented the work I do. Let me compare it with our president's example from Mount Rushmore. I read a book called Team of Rivals. If you haven't read it, it's long, but definitely worth reading, Doris Kearns Goodwin's book. And in it, she chronicles how Lincoln won the Republican nomination for president, and he competed against 4 other guys, none of whom he should have beaten. But he did. And one of the first things he did when he was elected president is he invited all 4 of them to be in his cabinet. And the reason he did that, maybe it had something to do with politics of inclusion, but I think more importantly it had to do with the fact that they had skills he did not have. And keeping the country together or bringing the country back together was going to require Avenger-like skills. And as great a person, as great a leader as Lincoln was, he knew that he needed other people to help him. And so in your leadership, you know you have to find other people who you can surround yourself with, be willing to share power with them, share control with them, incorporate them into your thinking, and benefit from their superpowers as well. Now, the third thing I'll say about leadership is about culture. I would not have had culture in this speech 10 years ago. Not a chance. I didn't understand even vaguely the importance of culture. I will tell you today, if I were starting a company, the first thing I would do is decide what culture I wanted the company to have. Culture is this incredible force multiplier that changes the way people work. I mentioned earlier I do a lot of work with Sonos. John McFarlane is the CEO of Sonos. This is his second company. He started software.com, went public, sold that, went away, spent 10 years building Sonos. And he is a demon about culture. It's in their hiring practices. It's in the way they operate every day. It's in their review process. It's in everything they do as a company. It's not a bunch of slogans on the wall. But when you talk to somebody at Sonos, you see the culture, and it comes out. The ability to work from a common culture changes the way you get things done. And so my view, if I were thinking this through in that structured a way, is I would start first with culture. And as the company grows, it gets harder and harder to keep culture. Sonos is passing 1,000 people. Suddenly, you're at a company like Microsoft that now has, 95,000 people and has a bunch of different cultures. There's a Nokia culture there now. It's a completely different place. It's a tough place to manage that way. It's one of Satya's big challenges. So think about how culture plays into your leadership experience and the way you think about leadership. So I've talked a little bit about superpowers, a great team, a great culture. The last thing I'll mention on leadership is about how you get people to follow you. And there's lots of good attributes for leaders that encourage people to follow them. But I'm going to focus on one which I think of as respect. In World War II, there were at least two, probably more, great American generals in the European theater. Dwight Eisenhower and George Patton. I almost said Douglas MacArthur, wrong theater. And Eisenhower and Patton couldn't be more different. Couldn't be more different. Eisenhower was a diplomat. He had to work with the Russians and the British and the French and the Canadians to do the largest invasion in human history and do it well. And everybody had to have their role. Everybody had to be happy with their role. Everybody got to pick their beach. And he had to negotiate all of that. And, by the way, manage his own generals who were chomping at the bit to get the work done. Patton, on the other hand, was a crazy man. He was a field commander, and he had one job and one job only. He didn't care how it got done. His job was to win. Now, both of those guys were great leaders. Only one of them was probably fit to be a president, but they were both great leaders. And completely different, but they had one thing in common. The people they worked with and the people who worked for them, the soldiers in their units, respected them. They didn't love him. Patton's troops didn't love him mostly, but they respected him. And so as you think about leadership and complementing your leadership skills, think about respect as a way to build teams and to get people to follow you. So that sort of wraps us up on the formal part of my talk. And to just sort of summarize things, I think of innovation as being one part strategy, one part thinking about entrepreneurship, and one part thinking about leadership and how you build teams. And if you wrap all those things together, you can do very innovative things. Now, I've put a slide on the screen here that says civic engineering. It's got my website, my Twitter account, and my LinkedIn account. The reason that's there is everything I just said today in my professional life now, I am doing in the civic space. So I'm working with nonprofits, I'm working with government agencies, I'm working with governments themselves to try to take the principles I talked about, in particular the 3P framework, and build that into the work they do, because we deserve better as citizens than we're getting today. And the book that you see there will get published in a couple of months. It takes the story of Xbox and reframes it in the context of corporate and civic renewal and how you can build that using some of the tools I talked about today. So with that, I'm going to open this up for Q&A. So there should be some mics roving, and if not, I'll repeat questions. But somebody needs to be brave and ask the first question, and then we'll get rolling. We have somebody. Perfect. Great. Here's a mic coming to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for a great presentation. This is a technical forum, so let me ask you a technical forum. Xbox was a disaster when it came out. It has $1 billion in warranty, and
Sure.
there was a lot of manufacturing issue with Xbox. So can you share with us what was the root cause of the issues and lessons learned?
Sure. It's actually a great story. So let's distinguish which parts of the disaster we want to talk about, because there's many parts to talk about. So the original Xbox, the big black one that you saw on the slide, was, from a manufacturing perspective, had all kinds of small problems, mostly because we were doing it fast. And speed is good, but speed can kill. And we never had any major warranty issues on that version of the product, but I will tell you the manufacturing team fought for 5 years to keep that product running smoothly in the factory. It was not designed, because we didn't have a strategy, it was not designed for manufacturability. It was not designed for cost reduction, which is why we lost $5 to $7 billion. So that's not a technical answer to your question, but on that first version of Xbox, the disaster was the P&L. And the thing that caused that was our inability to have the time and to have the knowledge, frankly, to think about cost reduction in a constructive way and build that into the product. The second version of Xbox, Xbox 360, had a disaster problem, which was, anybody here hear of 3 red lights? Red ring of death is another way this gets phrased. I always avoid the red ring of death thing. It doesn't feel quite as good as 3 red rings. The ring of death, we found this happening about 9 months into the product been in the market for about 9 months. And we started getting products returned. And 3 red rings on an Xbox isn't a specific air condition. It just is the box saying, I'm broken and I'm not going to start again ever. So thank you very much. So the team would get these boxes back, and we're trying to root cause this. And the boxes keep coming back, and we keep trying. Xbox had a great engineering team. We had the engineering teams from our silicon manufacturers. We had engineering teams with PhDs at Stanford and Harvard and MIT. We called in every expert we could possibly find. Ultimately, what we decided we had to do is we had to extend our warranty to 3 years. We took $1 billion write-off. And we repaired or replaced, depending on how you do the math, somewhere between 7.5 and 8.5 million consoles. And we had to set up an entire new manufacturing process for getting those consoles returned and returning them to people, and do it in a seamless way. And in the end, I will tell you that ultimately, the team would say, we can't point to a single problem. The team would say, systemically, the design had too many tight corners, and depending on how the product got used, those corners got crossed and the product would fail. And ultimately, what ended up happening, we did, probably 4 architecture redesigns. 5th one was the one that finally put the problem to rest for good. And when you saw the smaller, shorter, sleeker, slimmer, more beautiful black version of Xbox 360 come out, that one was of a completely different manufacturing quality than the first white one, and that's where the problem was. It's one of those very weird things. People want to know, well, come on, there had to be a component that failed or something that was wrong. And I think I could get the 5 senior engineering guys on the Xbox team in here, and they would swear to you on a Bible that they couldn't point to a single thing. And it really did require a systemic redesign to fix it. It's one of those problems that you hate having come up. We did the right thing for our customers. Our customer satisfaction went up during the time of the red ring of death. And mostly because people loved the product and they appreciated the fact that we took it back and replaced it. No questions asked. They paid no money. We Federal Expressed it both ways and took the hit on our P&L because it was our problem, not theirs. Other questions? I've got one right down here. So we'll try to wait for the mic. He's walking very quickly. Sure.
Excuse me, can you explain us about your superpower?
So it's a good question. I think people on the team, if they were here talking about Robbie's superpower, they would say my superpower was working together with teams and assimilating ideas from lots of different people. I'm not a technical person. I don't think I was never in Microsoft meetings the smartest person in the room. I always thought of myself as somebody who listened pretty well and could see a good idea when he heard it and could figure out how to pattern match that good idea to 3 other good ideas to come up with a great idea. And a lot of my job on Xbox was taking a team that was incredibly smart and very creative and figuring out how to sort through the wheat from the chaff, the good from the bad, and combine that into the right thing. And when I see people who work on the team, there was, by the time I left, probably 3,000 people working on Xbox. And so I didn't know everybody, but I run into people in the airport periodically. And they will all, almost to a person, say, hey, Robbie, my name's Frank or Jane. I worked on Xbox. I just wanted to thank you for the great job you did leading us and how much I respected the way you did it. And that's why I come back to respect as an important leadership thing. There are, for better or for worse, a number of leaders in our tech industry who are brilliant, but who don't necessarily have respect of their employees or of other people in the industry. And I think that's too bad. I think it's a lost art. I think it's an incredibly important one, and one that ultimately helps you get over other kinds of problems and other shortcomings. I had a question up here in the front.
When you're innovating in a company, it seems like it's hard not to cannibalize some sort of business unit or something that's in there. What did you run into in experiencing that, and how did you deal with it?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. First thing I will say, if you're in a company and you're worried about cannibalizing a business, stop worrying about it. If the business needs to be cannibalized and you have an idea to do it, trust me, somebody else in a different zip code has the same idea. And they are going to cannibalize your business for you. So if you have something that you think can cannibalize your business and can make it a better business, and it's going to be painful, decide to live with the pain. So that's the first thing I would say. In Microsoft, the good news is we mostly weren't cannibalizing any businesses. The one thing people would say is gaming on Windows suffered during the period of Xbox. And I don't know that that was because of Xbox or because of work we were doing. The Windows team, frankly, wasn't spending a lot of time worrying about the gaming market either. And in fact, the people who are driving most of the innovation in PC-based gaming today actually aren't at Microsoft today. Several of them are ex-Microsoft guys. So the closest thing to cannibalization would have been that. The bigger concern in the company was what we were going to do to the Microsoft brand. Because all those explosions and the different types of content in Xbox scared people. And we actually had to develop a set of principles around how we would deal with content and still enable people, creative people, to do what they wanted to do on the product. There's somebody with a question over here. He's on this side over here. She's coming. Yeah, it's a little bit of a sprint down the aisle.
All right. Why did you leave Microsoft, and can you comment on the success of the Xbox One and where that is?
Sure. I can tell you a lot on the first one and a little on the second part of that question. I left Microsoft, I was 48 years old when I left Microsoft. I left Microsoft because I had other things I wanted to do. I love the company. What I said at the beginning, I meant earnestly. I think it's a great company. It's an incredible opportunity. I feel like I'm one of the most fortunate people on the planet to have the opportunity to work there. But I got to the point where my boss, Steve Ballmer, and I had the discussion. He said, look, I want you to commit to another 5 years. We're winding down Xbox 360. We're kicking up Xbox One. Kinect is shipping, the new sensor on Xbox 360. Now is the logical transition time. But I really want you to stay for the next 5 years. And the next 5 years would have put me to the point where I would have spent my entire life at Microsoft. And I just said, you know what? I have other things I want to do. And so that has turned into this civic engineering work that I feel is an opportunity for me to take the good fortune and what I learned at Microsoft and give back in the community in a variety of different ways. And it's, I'm fortunate enough to have that opportunity. I want to make the most of it. And it's real work. Sometimes people say, well, you've retired. And I say, no. I retired from Microsoft. I'm by no means retired and quite busy and hopefully productively engaged. Other questions? Here, we got another one right here. He's right down the aisle, conveniently.
So on the struggles with the first two versions of Xbox, how did the combination of culture and leadership, how did you keep the team engaged, enthused, and how did you keep your leadership supportive that they didn't go down the wrong path with these billions of dollars leaking out?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Let me answer quickly in 3 parts. The first part is the team, this team believed. I always tell people there's 3 things in life that you have to have. You have to have faith, you have to have perseverance, and you have to take advantage of serendipity. This team had faith. The Xbox team were true believers from day one. A number of them were leaving Microsoft when Xbox started. They decided to stay to do it. A bunch of them came to Microsoft for the opportunity to change the gaming industry, and they believed, independent of my leadership. They were true believers. They had the faith, and I don't mean that in a religious sense. They had the faith that this was going to get done. Now, the second part is Bill and Steve. And Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer, early in this project, there's an epic and true story about the Valentine's Day massacre meeting. And Valentine's Day 2000, this is about 2 months after Bill and Steve have approved Xbox, they've had second thoughts. And they've suddenly discovered and really realized the implications of the fact that Xbox, the first version, is not a multitasking device. When you put a disk in the DVD drive, it takes over the machine and the operating system cannot interrupt it. That is a new concept for Microsoft. And Bill and Steve weren't sure. And we had this epic 3-hour meeting arguing about why we wanted to do it that way and why we couldn't make it a general purpose operating system piece of hardware. And the team said, that will not work. We said, well, then let's not do it. And they said, no, we have to do it. And at the end of that meeting, Bill and Steve said, we're done arguing. We're going forward. We're going to trust the team. And Bill and Steve never wavered 1 second from that. Not once. And I think they both get lots of credit and also lots of criticism for things they've done at Microsoft. I will tell you that without their personal commitment and their willingness to bet on a team, none of this happens. To your third question, how did I sustain my leadership? The truth is I came and in fact did submit my resignation letter about 2 months before Xbox launched. It was the most painful leadership experience for me in my life. And I am a strong person. I have a lot of fortitude. I cared about the people in the project, and it was destroying my personal life, and the team was impossible to manage, and I was hugely frustrated. And through the intervention of my boss at the time, a guy named Rick Belluzzo, who's a great guy, he told me, he said, look, this is the project you need to do. We need to help you do it. And so he helped me and got me some help with some other people. And I stuck it out. I took an 8-week sabbatical after the product launched and came back to do what was for me the best 6 or 7 years of my professional career. And it's a lesson for me in perseverance. I mentioned that word before. It's a very, very powerful thing. And it just tells you doing this stuff's not easy. And you're going to have moments of self-doubt for sure. Last question. Do we have one final question? I'm getting we have time for one more question signal.
Yeah, how do you see...
Where are you?
I'm over here.
Okay, got it. Yeah, sorry.
How do you see the whole gaming console industry changing the way people watch TV? Because I know that a lot of gaming consoles are supporting a lot of different TV feeds. People are really getting frustrated with cable companies, satellite companies, and so on. Yeah,
I'd tell you this. The gaming industry is not the gaming industry, or the console industry is not the console industry really. It's an interactive entertainment industry now. And I think television is going to be a part of that. Music will be a part of that. The connections between the genres of entertainment are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. The distances between them are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And the challenge, of course, in the TV space is you have these other sets of players called the cable and satellite guys that also have designs on creating that integrated experience. And increasingly, that's a complicated ecosystem. People talk about Apple doing a TV. And one of the challenges for Apple is they have to jump into that messy ecosystem. And it is indeed a very messy space. So I think the video game consoles are here to stay as things connected to your televisions. I think the idea that people are going to build things into their TVs is real, but I don't think the television industry as a whole has the skill set to actually do all of the software work required there, and I think having a connected device is going to be an important part of that future. With all of that said, the console gaming space is changing quite rapidly. It's actually probably more gaming going on the PC today and on your phone than there are in video game consoles. It's not that that industry is bad. The console industry continues to grow. But the fastest areas of growth today are in PC gaming and in mobile gaming. And it's a different ecosystem with mostly different companies, which is an interesting thing. So I'm going to wrap up. I want to thank you very much for your attention this morning, and I hope you have a great show. Thank you very much.